And so also, if I may interject, I think the reexamination by the board of the commercial mixed use versus educational institutional parking requirements would be beneficial, because I don't think they looked at it. Marshall Comstock indicated that he thought the parking requirements were far, far too low. And so I get the impression that the board was unsure themselves of which way to go on that issue.
What I find compelling.
Jerry, you act like you want to make a comment.
Yeah, you have a majority of the Board of Adjustment who made a decision.
Indeed.
That is the basis of your review. The dissenting opinions of individuals who were not on the prevailing side are not evidence to be looked at by this body. If there is specific information that you wish to elucidate from the Board of Adjustment through additional studies, I think what Bill's asking for is, if you don't like the commercial versus educational mix, then provide guidance as to what mix, if any, you want, or if you want it to be a particular use that you would like it to be compared to. And then, again, if there were comments by Commissioner Long that specifically address those issues, then it's this body's duty to specifically direct the Board of Adjustment as to what information you'd like developed, and if there is a way you would like it developed, to give that instruction as well.
Do we have any other time to think about this? I'm just kidding.
No,
I read on
gonna
this.
be-
I'm sorry. I didn't mean
it's
to. I'm
gonna
not
be-
making light of this. I'm sorry. I'm just. It's
Well,
just difficult.
let's stick with the facts
I am.
and
I-
get right to it then.
So, in part, I would appreciate that then the parking conditions that were put up, those three that you put up, would you put those back up?
Are these the standards that you're referring to?
Right, and you chose, and you all did three.
I think she's referring to the three scenario parking demands.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
There.
So then to reconsider scenario 3, conversion to mixed commercial and office, and for there to be a requirement of more spaces. And therefore, you have to do more studies.
Actually,
And
you
then
could
I-
have put up scenario number 4, which would be 100% educational,
Yeah, okay.
and consider each of those 4 separately rather than commingling.
Gary had a point.
Are you requesting that they find that more spaces are necessary? I thought that's what you just said.
I just felt like there, in the reading that I did from the minutes, I was left with information that was incomplete.
Okay.
And so to get more complete information from all the readings that we have done, I identified with Mr. Long and felt like it needed to be remanded based on the fact that there needed to be more information from city staff in scenarios, because I felt like that didn't satisfy the request. And number 7 of the cumulative impact on the comprehensive plan.
Okay, Bill, you
Just two things, I guess. The first of which of inadequate information. So if the council wishes to direct to be remanded to the Board of Adjustment with additional parking studies carried out at different times of day in order to have more complete information, that's one thing. If ultimately the parking requirement is going to be based on some number, whether it's the 104 spaces for the educational institution, just with no credit for any other potential use of the building, then you kind of wonder what is the necessity of that additional study. And maybe, I mean, the council does have the authority to affirm the decision and amend it and increase the required off-street parking. I mean, it almost seems like you're looking for an outcome rather than adding additional information. And if that's the council's wish, the council does have the authority to amend the condition of approval if the council wishes to do so.
Mine wasn't outcome related. Mine was I felt as though I had insufficient information.
And so if that's the case, then, you know, the remand would be to conduct additional parking studies to capture parking utilization in hours from early morning through the evening in order to assess what is available other than what was captured at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. And then the board consider that further. And if there's further instruction regarding what standard is to be applied for the mitigation, I guess you could certainly provide that information as well.
Jeannie,
This is for Ryan. Where did 9 and 2 come from again?
9 and 2 were the general peak hours for that individual study, for the ITE study.
What is ITE?
The ITE was, as previously discussed, talking about the engineering study that was conducted for multiple universities that we derive some of our information from.
Okay, so, all right. So what we have is data that's been recommended from a multi-university study, generally accepted as the authority on this sort of thing? Is that what I'm getting from this?
Perhaps Bill can
National
shed
standard
a
of
little
some
bit more light
sort?
for them.
Yeah, I mean, the IT manual provides estimations of traffic that will be generated from a variety of land uses based on a number of studies.
Okay.
But the 9 and 2 really was not derived from the IT manual. Those were hours we just selected to do an evaluation of parking utilization as it may appear in the morning when students may be arriving and in the afternoon time period. So there was no, it was just times that were selected. Ultimately, that was not the basis of the parking mitigation requirement. It was the comparison of, and essentially the same mitigation that was applied to NSA's current location, which was to assess parking demands of that building if it were in other uses like any other business downtown, and requiring them to mitigate the parking that they demanded that exceeded what would be required of those other uses. So while it was information that was shared to talk about what's the current utilization, it was not intended to be really the basis of the determination of the mitigation that would be required for the use.
Right.
And so we can certainly take a look and more information can be developed. It wouldn't change necessarily how we would recommend looking at mitigation, but that's ultimately up to the board or ultimately up to the council if it's appealed to this body. And so, but
I find
that was-
the statement that you just made rather compelling in that it is, you made a reasoned recommendation from the last time we dealt with an educational institution being on Main Street. And then also, I'm not convinced that we're going to get any different data, even though we bring more in. I don't think we're going to find a compelling reason to change any of this. Plus, the Board of Adjustment looked at all of this and still made their decision the way they did, their recommendation. So I am not convinced we need to go back for more.
John?
I agree with you, Gina. I think that as far as this parking thing goes, CJ's was down there for years. Every Friday night, every Saturday night, they'd have 1,000 people in that bar. And didn't hear a complaint from anybody. Occasionally, the cops would talk about the fact that they had to break up a fight or two. Well, it's a bar. You're going to have to break up a fight or two in a college bar, in a college town. But I think what we've got here is people didn't like the outcome, and now they're trying to find a way to get a recount. And I don't think that is the ethical thing for the city to do. I think everybody ought to be treated essentially the same, and I haven't heard Mingles. Nobody said anything about Mingles not having enough parking places, and I think we're opening up a can of worms, and by saying that in this particular place with this particular business, we don't like it. And I think that using the dodge of we don't like it because of the parking is just that, just a dodge. And I can't support that motion of Kathleen made.
I'm going to agree with John about the perception of parking downtown is more of a problem than the actual availability of parking. But in this particular instance where it's an educational institution as opposed to a business, I think the addition of more data is like warranted to make. I would doubt that the Board of Adjustment will, that there's if it's remanded, that it will change their decision, but I just think that they will be more comfortable, and it's probably, the outcome is probably more likely to be unanimous than split. So I'd very much like to see some data about the noon hour, and I'd very much like to see some data about where the parking is going to be located for the educational institution. That's my basis for seconding the motion.
And I'll say one thing about that. Educational institutions not going to secure the parking until they get the CUP. If they don't get, they're not going to buy parking and then not get the CUP. I mean, they'd be foolish to do that. So,
Well, I wouldn't expect them to buy the parking,
Whatever.
but to identify where it may be could be possibly done.
so